I'm a piranha.
This intro is cursed. This is the 4th time I had to record it. At least there's tea. Croeso, friends. Welcome back to Opus Eleni, where we finish embroidery projects eventually. Not the Sabriel surcoat, although that does continue slowly but surely. No, this is the Elizabethan Blackwork shirt that I made for my partner for solstice in December. That was when it was supposed to be delivered, but instead it ended up being a summer solstice present. We got there in the end, though. One thing I have always loved about upper-class Elizabethan clothing is all of the blackwork embroidery. There's just something about the precision and delicacy of the counted work that is so satisfying to look at. This kind of blackwork can be either worked in large motifs with filled designs or in a more linear way consisting of geometric or floral patterns. This shirt will have the second kind of decoration, which lends itself well to cuffs and collar. The design I chose is from the court painting of Jane Seymour by Hans Holbein the Younger, whose meticulous attention to detail allows modern costumers to get really granular with recreations. I also looked to extant smocks and shirts from 16th century England that have insertion details along all of the seams. Because the silk embroidery and insertion stitches make this shirt more difficult and time-consuming to launder, it wouldn't be everyday wear for a nobleman, but something that would be worn on special occasions, at court, or while posing for a painting. Undergarments were meant to protect outer clothing from body oils and sweat, and were washed often. The decision to decorate something like that with difficult-to-launder silk embroidery is a marker of wealth and conspicuous consumption. Okay, everyone, grab your cuppa. Today, I am drinking the Gilded Lily by Fairy Tale Teas. It's an Irish breakfast tea with lemon and almond notes, and you can get the tea with or without golden pixie dust. I'm pretty sure everyone can guess which I prefer. Let's get into it. The first thing I'm going to do is make sure the edge is cut on the grain. I'm not going to bother pulling a thread, I just need it to be mostly straight, in the same way that Wesley is mostly dead. From there, I'll measure down the length of each body piece and make a snip in the selvage. Since almost everything is rectangles, and because I'm lazy, I'm just going to rip the pieces, which will ensure a straight grain cut. But Courtney, you say, why didn't you iron your fabric before? Because ripping fabric can make the torn edges wavy where the threads pull away from each other, and I hate trying to sew with that. So I skip ironing until after, when I can kind of tame those wavy edges into place with steam. The basis of the insertion stitch is a tied buttonhole stitch, which is basically where you make 2 blanket stitches and then wrap the thread around the tops of those stitches, tying them together in a V before taking the next 2 stitches. I'm using this to hem the individual pieces as well, so it's doing double duty. A lot of you have asked about my weighted stitching pillow. It was made for me ages ago as a going away present from a very sweet lady in my original SCA group before I moved down here. I don't have a pattern, but I might see if I can reverse engineer it if there's enough interest. Let me know in the comments if you'd like for me to make a pattern and toss it up in the coffee shop. You can see that I'm catching the edge of the double folded hem with every blanket stitch to make sure it's well secured. Once I have the front panel all hemmed, I'm marking the slit with my trusty friction pen and then cutting it open. I went to my local needlework store and picked up some thread for the embroidery and delicate hemming. It's a high twist silk thread that's more like buttonhole twist than pearl cotton type thread. I'll be using this for the blackwork embroidery as well as the more delicate buttonhole stitches at the cuffs and collar. For the length of the front slit, the stitch will be the same, but as I reach the bottom, I can't double fold the hem anymore, so I'll switch to a tight packed regular buttonhole stitch for the very bottom. Once I've successfully encased the raw edges at the end of the slit, I'll work a bar tack to help take some of the stress off that cut slit so it's less likely to continue tearing under pressure. It's basically just a couple of stitches with buttonhole stitches to keep them together and reinforce them. I'm not even sure it's called a bar tack formally, I've just always heard it called that. If you know it is something else, let me know in the comments. After all of the pieces are hemmed, I'll sew them together with a simple whip stitch through the tops of the tied buttonhole stitches. Here I am about to add the shoulder gussets. These are triangle-shaped pieces of fabric that are inserted into the shoulder seam so the wide end is toward the collar to accommodate the slope of the trapezius muscle. Eventually, this will become incorporated into the shirt front and back, resulting in the angled shoulder seams of modern shirts. Thank you to all of my current and continuing Ko-fi members, especially my newest members, Kioran, Elizabeth, and Tiny Shiny Crumb. Your support and the support of all of my members and croissants makes it easier to do what I do and to provide quality content for everyone. Thank you so much. Stick around after this brief commercial break to see the final assembly details and finishing touches. Here is where I should be putting all of the aesthetic TM close-up shots of me embroidering, but somehow when I went through all my files, I could not find a single one. I'm not sure if I just kept thinking, oh, I'll be embroidering forever, so I'll film it later, or if the files got lost in the great computer crash of 21. Either way, enjoy these long shots since they're the only ones that survived. I embroidered the cuffs and collar on even weave linen the same color as the body of the shirt. I prepared the pieces by zigzagging around all of the sides in order to stabilize the fabric, and I didn't use a hoop. I prefer to work counted stitch on unstretched fabric, but that's a personal choice. I pressed the seam allowances of the collar and cuffs toward the inside on both the embroidery and linen lining and whip stitched them together. I'm going to use a very loose divide and conquer method to get the shirt neckline down to the same length as the collar. I experimented with gathering the fabric as I did the blanket stitch, but I wasn't satisfied with the way that looked, so instead I opted to baste the pleats down with a running stitch in linen thread and then work the tied buttonhole stitch over that. I'll be doing the same thing for each cuff as well. After working a plain buttonhole stitch around the edge of the collar and cuffs, I found that it looked better than the tied version in this instance. I will attach the two pieces together with a whip stitch. To make thread-covered buttons, I will start with a wooden bead as the base and loop the thread through the hole and around the outside of the bead 6 times to form the ribs, leaving a substantial tail. Tie the thread to secure it and then work the fill stitch starting from the opposite end from the tail. The fill stitch is done by taking a stitch under one thread rib, then another stitch under that same rib so that the working thread loops around it, then moving on to stitch under the next rib. Basically, you're looping the yarn around each thread rib from underneath in succession. Once you reach the top and the entire bead is covered, secure the working thread by tying it to the tail. I opted for button loops instead of buttonholes, mostly because the idea of cutting into the embroidery for regular buttonholes was physically painful to contemplate. I'm making a couple of thread loops over my finger to make sure they're all the same size, and then working a buttonhole or ladder stitch snugly around the loops. You can see that I go back and forth on the direction of those stitches so that they balance each other. If you work all the ladder stitches from one direction, they will spiral like a friendship bracelet. For the collar fastenings, I decided to go with ties instead of buttons, mostly because the extant shirts and smocks all had tie fastenings on both cuffs and collar. I generally skip tie fastenings on wrists though, because you need another person to help you tie them, and they're really impractical to work in. This finger loop braid is a flat cord made by passing the bottom loop from one hand through the top loop of another back and forth. I will put a link in the description to fingerloop.org, which is the authority on learning to finger loop braid. It's a fancy bag.
Is
it going?
Yes.
Okay.
Tissue paper, yay! Ooh, wow. That's really cool.
So it's all hemmed individually and sewn together with an insertion stitch.
It's cool.
Wow.
This, why it took me so long.
I didn't see that.
So the ties are finger looped braided. They're finger looped braids.
Mm-hmm.
And then the buttons are thread covered buttons and like needle bound loops.
That's
So everything
awesome.
on here is hand sewn.
Thank you. I love it.
You're welcome. Thank you for joining me today. I am so happy with how this project came out and so pleased that my partner loves it as much as I do. Thank you also to everyone who has joined my Discord server. It has been a rousing success so far. We are currently doing a low-key, no-pressure sew-along where we're just trying to make or finish something by September 21st when the next sew-along will start. The link to the Discord is in the description box, so feel free to join. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe and click the bell if that's your jam. If you're interested in finding me on social media, I am at Opus LNI everywhere, and those links will all be in the description box. I will also post the link to my Ko-fi where you can leave a one-time tip, browse my web shop, or join my membership tiers for additional content and a personal thank you of your very own in my next video. Until next time, be kind, do the work, continue supporting marginalized people, and keep creating. Well.